Morgan Freeman stepped out of the taxi into the rain. Gray clouds hung heavily over the city, as if trying to crush everyone beneath them. Fine raindrops trickled down the collar of his old coat, soaking the fabric to the thread. The wind lashed against his face, forcing him to lower his head and pull his collar up higher. The street was almost empty, with only a few people hurrying under umbrellas. But Morgan walked slowly, as if each step took effort. His old shoes splashed through the wet cobblestones, leaving behind traces that quickly disappeared under the fresh streams of rain. He stopped in front of a jewelry store window. Inside, under soft lighting, rings, necklaces, and bracelets sparkled. Delicate pieces that seemed unattainable. Morgan's gaze lingered on one ring, a thin silver band with a small diamond in the center. His heart quickened. He pushed open the glass door. A soft chime rang above his head. Inside it was warm and quiet, with only the faint scent of expensive perfume filling the space. A young woman stood behind the counter. Her blonde hair was perfectly tied back in a ponytail, and her flawless black suit fit her as if it were tailored. She was beautiful but cold, like a sculpture carved for marble. Her gray eyes immediately locked onto Morgan. He took a few steps forward, leaving wet footprints on the polished floor. The woman noticed. Her gaze dropped to his worn shoes, old and scuffed, then to his coat, dripping with rainwater. Her smile remained in place, but her eyes turned colder. "Good afternoon," she said, without a trace of warmth. "How can I help you?" Morgan smiled, trying to hide the tension in his voice. "I'd like to look at some rings." She raised an eyebrow. Her gaze swept over his clothes again. "We have a rather extensive collection. Some pieces may be." Her voice turned icier, "quite expensive." Morgan noticed it. He recognized that tone. It was judgment. She had already decided he couldn't afford anything in that store. "I understand," he replied calmly. "If you're interested in something simpler, I could show you our silver collection. It's more affordable." Morgan hesitated for a moment, then pointed at the ring he had seen in the window. "May I see that one?" Kate froze for a moment. "That model is from Tiffany's. It's $18,000. Her voice almost sounded like a warning. "May I?" He didn't take his eyes off the ring. She unlocked the display case, though with obvious reluctance. Kate placed the ring on a black velvet tray and stepped back slightly. Morgan picked it up, holding it between his fingers. "Beautiful work," he said quietly. Kate said nothing. Her eyes drifted once more to his worn shoes. She noticed how water was still dripping from his coat onto the floor. "I'm sorry." Her voice sharpened. Morgan lifted his eyes. "We deeply value our customers," Kate said, "but I must ask you not to leave wet footprints on the floor." Morgan smiled faintly. "Apologies. I didn't mean to cause trouble." She didn't respond. Morgan set the ring back on the tray. "Thank you for your time." Kate watched as he turned toward the door, but before he could leave, her voice stopped him. "One moment." Morgan turned back. "I really think you'd be better off looking for something more suited to your budget." He met her gaze. "Or perhaps at a different store," she added, her voice now almost icy. Morgan looked at her for a few seconds. His smile faded. "Understood," he said quietly. Kate had already turned back toward the display case, not even bothering to look at him. He stepped back into the rain, feeling the cold drops strike his face once again. His heart pounded heavy and slow. He knew he would be back. But next time, things would be different. Morgan stopped at the door. His hand was already on the handle, but he didn't leave. Instead, he slowly turned around and looked at Kate again. She stood behind the display case, arms crossed over her chest, gazing at him with a look devoid of even the slightest interest. "You know," Morgan said softly, "I thought customers were welcomed with a smile in places like this." Kate raised an eyebrow slightly. "I smiled at you. Was that a smile?" Morgan tilted his head slightly. It felt more like a sneer. The kind you give when you've already decided who someone is just by looking at their clothes. A cold glint flashed in her eyes. Forgive me if I came across as rude, but I think I'm entitled to form opinions based on obvious facts. Morgan smiled. Obvious facts? You mean the old coat? The shoes that have seen better days? Kate didn't look away. Let's be honest, it's not exactly the look of someone prepared to spend $18,000 on a Tiffany's ring. Morgan took a step forward. Water still dripped from the edges of his coat onto the floor. And so what? He stared directly into her eyes. Kate stepped back, but held her head high. If you're trying to prove a point, this isn't the best way. Morgan tilted his head slightly, studying her face. What if I told you that I could buy that ring right now? Kate's eyes narrowed slightly, her expression sharpening into a cold smile. Really? Yes. Right now. She moved toward the counter and leaned her palms on it. Then buy it. Morgan chuckled, low and quiet, almost like a challenge. You know what the problem is, he said, stepping even closer. You've already decided who I am, and now you want to watch me fail. Kate's gaze remained cold. It's just business. No, Morgan shook his head slowly. It's not business. It's pride. You don't want me to buy that ring because it would shatter your worldview. Because if I can afford it, then you were wrong about me. And you can't stand that. A flicker of irritation passed through her eyes. And what if I'm not wrong? What if you're just trying to prove something, but you don't actually have that kind of money? Morgan paused. His smile sharpened. And what if I told you you're right? Kate didn't answer. What if I told you I can't afford that ring? That I came here just to look at it, to imagine how it would look on the hand of the person I love? His voice lowered, but that only made it sound stronger. Would that change anything? Kate remained silent. Her face stayed cold, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Morgan took a step back and glanced at the ring in the display case. In any case, thank you for your time. He turned toward the door and reached for the handle. Wait, Kate said sharply. Morgan stopped but didn't turn around. If you can't afford it, why come in? Morgan hesitated for a moment before replying. Because I wanted to see what hope looks like. And then he stepped out into the rain, leaving Kate standing in the middle of the store with a confused expression, and, for the first time, a trace of uncertainty in her eyes. Morgan Freeman stepped out of the store, and the cold rain immediately stung his face. The street was gray and featureless. Cars slowly moved along the wet asphalt, people hid under umbrellas, and the heavy sky hung over the city, as if it were about to fall to the ground. He stopped under the awning of a neighboring building, took the hood off his head, and pulled his phone from the pocket of his old coat. His fingers were cold from the rain, but his voice remained calm and steady as he pressed the familiar number. It's me, he said when someone answered on the other end. I need information. Of course, Mr. Freeman. What exactly are you looking for? Morgan looked through the store's glass window. Kate was still behind the counter, her posture tense, her gaze focused. She was unfolding a velvet napkin, as if trying to distract herself from what had just happened. The jewelry store employee on Fifth Avenue, he spoke. Brunette, high cheekbones, sharp gaze. Confident, but a bit cold. Find out everything you can, and quickly. It will be done, came the reply from the other end. Morgan put the phone back in his pocket and ran a hand through his hair, brushing off the raindrops. Then he looked through the glass at Kate again. She was already cleaning the display, her movements precise and assured, but there was still that cold gleam in her eyes. Morgan smiled to himself. Let's see who you really are, he muttered, stepping back from the store and disappearing into the flow of people on the sidewalk. The next day was sunny, although the air remained cool after the night's rain. The sunlight reflected off the shiny glass windows, and the morning crowd had already filled the streets. Kate stood behind the counter, carefully arranging a new collection of bracelets on a velvet display. She felt a pleasant fatigue from the busy morning when the store's door opened, and a man stepped inside. She raised her head, and her fingers froze above the jewelry. Morgan Freeman. But this time, he looked completely different. He wore a perfectly tailored black Armani suit, the jacket draped over his shoulders as if it had been made just for him. The white shirt flawlessly accentuated the sharp lines of his figure, and a luxury Rolex watch glistened on his wrist. His hair was neatly styled, and a subtle smile reflected in his dark eyes. Kate pressed her lips together, feeling her heart race. "Good day," his voice was soft, but there was an unmistakable confidence in it. Kate straightened her back and scowled. "Back again." Morgan approached the counter, his gaze sliding over the jewelry before meeting hers again. "Why not? It's a good store." Kate raised an eyebrow. "You didn't seem interested in jewelry yesterday." He leaned in a little closer, his smile growing more subtle. "Yesterday, I was more interested in you." Kate tensed, but didn't look away. "And what did you find out?" Morgan ran his finger along the glass surface of the counter. "That you've been working here for 3 years. The store owner is very pleased with you because your sales are the highest, and that you never allow yourself to make mistakes." Kate felt her cheeks flush. "You check me out?" Morgan smiled casually with a challenge. "I just wanted to know who I'm dealing with." She clenched her fists beneath the counter. "You have a strange way of getting to know people." "And you have a strange way of greeting customers," he replied. "Do you always treat potential buyers like this?" Kate gritted her teeth, feeling the anger rising inside her. "You weren't even planning to buy anything." "But today I am." Morgan traced his finger along the edge of the display case. "Show me the diamond earrings." She involuntarily raised an eyebrow. "For someone special?" "Maybe," he said, his voice tinged with slight mockery. "If I'm lucky." Kate silently opened the display, took out a small velvet box, and placed it in front of him. "Here." Her voice was cold. Morgan picked up one earring, held it up to the light, inspected it, and nodded. "They're beautiful." He lifted his gaze and looked her directly in the eyes. "Just like you." Kate felt her chest tighten, but she quickly composed herself. "Does flattery help you in life?" "Sometimes." He placed the earring back into the box. "But I don't think it'll work with you." She pressed her lips together. "You're right." Morgan smiled. "Great. I love challenges." He took a black leather wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket and, without hesitation, placed his black card on the counter. "Wrap it up." Kate silently took the card and walked to the register, feeling his gaze on her. Her hands were cold, but her movements remained steady. She packaged the earrings in an elegant black box, tied it with a silver ribbon, and turned back to him. "Here." She handed him the box, avoiding his gaze. Morgan took it, his fingers brushing against hers. A light touch, and Kate felt shivers run down her skin. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and soft. "I'll be back." He turned and walked toward the door. "No need," Kate murmured as he was about to leave. Morgan stopped for a second, turned his head, and winked at her. "We'll see." And then he left. Kate stood behind the counter, hands clenched. Her heart was beating too fast. She watched him disappear behind the glass doors, angry at herself for not being able to stop the sudden spark of curiosity that had ignited deep inside her. The evening wrapped the city in a soft mist. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk, and a gentle breeze played in the treetops. Kate was closing the store, lowering the metal shutters on the display window. She was about to head home when her work radio beeped in her pocket. "Kate," the manager's voice sounded anxious. "You need to come in tomorrow morning for a meeting with the owner." Kate stopped, frowning. "Why we?" "Have changes." The manager hesitated. "The store has been sold." "What?" Kate spun around to the closed door, as if she could see the answer to her question. "We haven't been told all the details yet, but tomorrow morning there will be a meeting with the new owner. Please be on time." Kate felt her heart drop somewhere down. She had worked here for 3 years, spent so much effort proving her competence, earning her clients' trust. And now all of that might be gone. Fine, she said coldly and turned off the radio. She walked home with a heavy heart, but the whole way, one image stayed in her mind. Morgan Freeman's confident smile, his calm gaze, and how easily he had placed his black card on the counter. The next morning, Kate arrived at the store 15 minutes early. She stood behind the counter, nervously tapping her nail on the glass surface. Other employees had gathered in the hall, exchanging guesses about the new owner. The door opened right at 9 o'clock, and when Kate saw who entered, her heart skipped a beat. Morgan Freeman. He appeared in a flawless dark blue suit that perfectly accentuated his figure. His watch gleamed on his wrist in the morning sunlight. Behind him walked a man in a strict gray suit holding a tablet. "Good morning," Morgan smiled, scanning the room with his gaze. Kate clenched her teeth, trying to hide her shock. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was cold. Morgan stopped right in front of her and slightly tilted his head. "I think it's time for me to introduce myself properly." He paused, savoring her surprised expression. "Morgan Freeman, the new owner of this store." A silence filled the room. Kate felt her face flush. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "You bought this store?" she finally asked. "Yes," he smiled even wider. "And yesterday's service satisfied me completely, so I decided to make the investment." Kate felt a surge of anger inside her. "You can't just—" "Oh, I can," he interrupted, "and I already have." "Why?" She narrowed her eyes. "Is this some kind of revenge?" Morgan took a step closer, his voice soft but with an underlying sharpness. "What if I say it's just business?" She met his gaze, not looking away. "Then I don't believe you." Morgan smiled, and his gaze softened for a moment. "Smart girl." He ran his hand along his tie and turned to the other employees. "Changes will be gradual. For now, everything remains the same. If you have questions, come directly to me." Kate still stood there, unable to believe what was happening. Morgan turned back to her, his gaze sweeping over her face. "By the way, Kate," he leaned in closer so she could smell his perfume, fresh, with hints of cedar and bergamot. "I think we should get to know each other better." She tensed, clenching her fists. "I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's a great one." He winked at her and walked toward the exit. Kate watched him go, her heart pounding so fast it felt like it would jump out of her chest. She wanted to shout something after him, but the words got stuck in her throat. And when he left, Kate turned to her colleagues, who still stood with confused expressions. "It's just a joke," she mumbled. But deep down, she already knew. This was just the beginning. A week passed. Kate had been trying to avoid Morgan all these days, though it was difficult. He came into the store almost every day, checking the staff's work, discussing various matters with the manager, but he hardly ever approached her. She noticed how he looked at her, but every time she caught his gaze, he would just smile and walk away. Kate couldn't make sense of her feelings. She was angry at him for so easily buying their store, as if it were some kind of toy. At the same time, she was impressed by his confidence and the way the other employees treated him with respect. One evening, when the store was almost closing, the door opened, and Morgan walked in. He was in a dark gray suit, a little relaxed, without a tie, but still impeccable. "You're still here?" His voice was warm. Kate looked at him skeptically. Work is work. Morgan walked past the counter and stood beside her, resting his elbow on the glass surface. "Listen." His voice became serious. "I want to apologize." Kate sharply lifted her head. "Apologize?" "Yes." Morgan ran a hand through his hair, a bit disheveled from the wind. "I understand that my actions may have seemed impulsive, and I shouldn't have put you in such an uncomfortable position." Kate crossed her arms over her chest. "You bought the store, too. Get back at me for firing you?" Morgan shook his head and chuckled quietly. "No, it was a test." She raised her eyebrows. "A test? I've been eyeing this store for a while, but I needed to know how it operates from the inside. And who runs it, and how do you think I did?" Kate looked at him defiantly. Morgan took a step closer. "Perfectly." Kate flinched at his proximity, but didn't back away. "So what now?" Morgan paused for a moment before speaking. "I want you to become the store manager." Kate froze, staring at him. "What?" "I'm serious." You know this store better than anyone. You know how to work with customers, manage staff, and make decisions under pressure. I want you to run the store." Kate felt her heart race in her chest. "This is such a ridiculous decision." "Why?" he smiled. "Because I barely know you." "That's true," Morgan tilted his head, "but I know I can trust you. And I'm sure you're the one who can make this store better." Kate looked at him, her heart pounding wildly. She had so many reasons against this, but at the same time, she knew he was right. "And what will happen if I refuse?" Morgan shrugged. "Then I'll keep coming here every day until you accept that I'm your boss." Kate sighed, hiding a smile. "I haven't said yes yet. I'll wait." Morgan winked and headed for the door. He had already grabbed the door handle when he heard her voice. "Morgan." He turned around. "I accept the offer," Kate said, smiling slightly. Morgan stopped for a moment, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Good, manager. See you tomorrow." And he left, leaving her standing in the middle of the store, her chest fluttering, knowing this was only the beginning of something big. The next week passed in a haze. Kate still couldn't believe she had become the store manager. She had received the keys, the official documents, and now her office was on the second floor, spacious, with glass walls and a view of the sales floor. She quickly immersed herself in the work. She held meetings with the staff, reviewed deliveries, optimized work schedules. Kate had always been demanding of herself, and now she was determined to prove that Morgan had made the right choice. Morgan came into the store almost every day. Although at first she felt tense in his presence, over time they started talking more. His cold confidence gradually changed into something softer, warmer. He listened carefully to her suggestions, agreed with the changes, and sometimes they even disagreed. But now those were productive arguments. One evening, when Kate was about to leave after a long day, Morgan appeared in the doorway of her office. "Do you still have time for coffee?" he asked with a smile. Kate looked at him over the laptop screen. "If you're treating me." "Always," he said, winking. They went to a small cafe across the street. Morgan ordered her a caramel latte, even though she had never told him she liked caramel. "Did you guess or did you overhear?" Kate asked suspiciously as he placed the cup in front of her. "Attention to detail is the key to success in business," he replied with a mysterious smile. They sat at a table by the window, and Kate felt the tension between them from the beginning gradually disappear. She looked at Morgan in a new light. His confidence no longer seemed arrogant to her. Now she saw strength and experience behind it. "I thought you were some kind of pompous businessman when I first saw you," she confessed. "I noticed," Morgan laughed. "And I thought you were too blunt and straightforward. And how do you feel about my straightforwardness now?" Morgan smiled, running his finger around the edge of his cup. "I like it." Kate felt warmth spreading in her chest. She met his gaze, and this time she didn't look away. "You know, I still think you're a bit crazy, maybe. But you agreed to work with me," he pointed out. "Not sure it was the right decision," she teased. Morgan leaned closer. "If it was the wrong decision, you can still quit." Kate leaned in closer too. Their faces were only a few centimeters apart. "What if I stay?" Morgan smiled, his eyes sparkling. "Then we'll build something great together." Kate couldn't stop smiling. She took a sip of her coffee and said, "Well, let's see if you're really the business genius they say you are, and I'll see if you're really as good a manager as I think," he replied. They both laughed. The tension between them had completely disappeared, and Kate realized that this wasn't just the beginning of a new job. It was the beginning of something bigger. Morgan put down his cup and looked at her. "So, tomorrow at 9, Kate confirmed. She stood up, and Morgan walked her to the door. When she reached for the handle, he quietly said, "I'm glad you stayed." Kate turned and looked him straight in the eyes. "I am too." She left, feeling her heart beat faster. A new chapter of her life awaited, and this time, she knew she was ready for anything.